in this episode of the Critical Oxygen podcast.
The biggest problem with AI is, in my mind, as it relates to training, is the idea that it is like a panacea, right? That we've conquered, that we know everything. And the reason that it's not is because data models are only as important, successful, accurate as the data set that they are trained on.
Welcome to the Critical Oxygen podcast, where we help you optimize your physiology and maximize your endurance potential. I'm your host, Phil Batterson. I have a PhD in molecular exercise physiology, and I'm the founder of Critical Oxygen, where my mission is to build better endurance athletes through remote education and in-person physiological testing. Today, I'm joined by my friend David Mehlman, where we're going to be talking about how artificial intelligence is going to change the endurance space. David Mehlman is an entrepreneur, investor, and avid endurance athlete. Throughout his career, David has worked in sell-side equity research for a multi-billion-dollar equity hedge fund, and as an early-stage investor focused on the consumer and technology sectors. His love of data has led him to explore the subject of quantitative analysis and assessment in sport and his own performance. I'm super excited for all of you to hear this conversation I had with David. We talk about data-driven performance and artificial intelligence and its potential uses for your training and racing. We also touch on whether or not we think AI is going to take over the world or your coaching job. David is just a fun guy to talk to. So without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with David Mehlman about artificial intelligence as it relates to the endurance space. David Mehlman, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Phil, thanks for having me again.
Yeah, this is our first conversation, actually. Got a lot of positive feedback. People are like, oh, super interesting episode. I think having somebody like yourself who is purely just trying to optimize their own endurance potential, and then how you can utilize technology and not get drowned by the technology is super useful for people, because I think for those of you who haven't heard the first podcast episode with David, go back. I think it was probably within the first 20 episodes or something along those lines. So go check that out. But yeah, good feedback. It's really interesting. We talked a lot about, not getting lost in the noise of the data and trying to figure out what's best to individualize your own training and other things like that. But today we're going to kind of make a pivot and talk about AI and the changing landscape of, kind of like coaching and training and other things like that. So I'm excited to dig into that with you, David.
Yeah, likewise. A lot going on, obviously, in the AI space. So a lot of noise, but a lot of signal as well.
Yeah. I think, and again, I think that's like the bottom line with all this data that we're starting to generate is like, how do we actually pick out things that are meaningful changes, and how do we, ignore the non-meaningful changes that are, probably noise and going to take us down an incorrect direction, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. So I think the first thing is let's kind of establish. How did you get involved with, say, AI? What was your draw to it? And yeah, let's just start with that.
Yeah. So I have an interest in AI that is both personal and professional. I am an early stage investor. We invest in early stage technology companies. You can't be in that world and not hear about artificial intelligence, every single minute, hour, whatever it is today. So I have some need to know about it. We don't actually invest in a lot of AI companies because we don't have domain expertise there. And it is quite frankly, an easy way to light a bunch of money on fire, right? Someone is going to win, or some group of companies are going to win, but we do not feel that we have the ability to assess that. We're not engineers, we're not data scientists, so on and so forth. So that said, a lot of our portfolio companies are using AI tools to enhance or enrich their product or service. So we have sort of a first derivative relationship with AI in a lot of ways. And then personally, I am a quantitative data driven person.
Hmm.
And AI is the new frontier of that, especially as it relates to my training. And so I've been personally interested in trying to learn how to use AI, or who is trying to use AI to separate the signal from the noise.
Hmm.
And people like to overcomplicate things a lot, either to sound smart or to create to create job security for themselves or whatever it may be.
Right.
Um, but the truth is that the world of advancement follows a relatively repeatable path, right? You know, 20 years ago, or I guess 30 years ago, people were putting training plans on pieces of paper and faxing them back and forth, and using stopwatches on tracks, and and then it got to watches that had GPS, but you had to plug them into your phone, into your computer, and download them onto your hard drive. Then people were using Excel to build models. This is the next iteration of the technological advancement cycle that we're in, right?
Hmm.
And it is a very powerful one, and very likely a revolutionary one as opposed to an evolutionary one, right? There are small changes, and then there are very large sort of step function changes. This obviously feels like it's a step function change.
Hmm.
But there are a lot of caveats to that, and we'll dive into that. But my interest is both personal and professional, because at the end of the day, my goal, as it relates to running and endurance training, is to figure out what my limit is.
Hmm.
I will never be an OTQ marathoner. I will never be within, I don't know, 40 minutes of that probably. But that comparison is not where it lies for me. It's not where the journey lies for me. The journey for me is, how close can we get to our potential,
Hmm.
right? And the goal is to get as close as you can to your potential, then increase that potential, then get as close as you can to that potential, and then increase that potential. And so I believe that technology can be very, very useful in doing that for a number of reasons, the least of which is not time, money, effort. All of these things are scarce resources. They're
Hmm.
finite and limited. And you have to look for the highest ROI things you can do,
Hmm.
right? It is very easy to waste a lot of resources, whichever resources they may be, on things that provide marginal gains for you, right?
Hmm.
And if you think about it sort of in a 2 by 2 matrix, there's heavy investment for low return. No one would do that,
Hmm.
right? There's minimal investment for a very high return. Everyone wants to do that, but it's exceedingly difficult to find, right? Or
Yep.
everyone would be infinitely wealthy and fast, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Um, there is low investment for low return, which is just sort of, okay, the ROI might be fine, but what's the point? And
Yep.
then there's this substantial investment for substantial return.
Hmm.
And that's really where we want to focus, right? We're willing to put in the effort, we're willing to put in the work, but it has to generate enough return for us to make sense. So you see all these people with supplements and all of these things. Okay, some of those things maybe, because the investment is so low, do you take another pill, and or do you have, you know, um, beet concentrate before, and there's no real risk to it. It's not going to injure you or make you sick or anything. Maybe it has upside, maybe it doesn't, but the investment, the I, is so low that it's worth a flyer. Okay, I
Hmm.
could see that, an argument for that. What I think the biggest shortcoming of most people's training is that they're spending a lot of time, money, and energy on things that have low return,
Hmm.
right? And that's what you really, really, really want to stay away from. And you want to make sure that the vast majority of your training, and training I consider not just to be, the time that you're out there running on the street, right? It's the
Hmm.
time that you're eating, the time that you're sleeping, the time that you're doing your strength training, the time that you're doing whatever it is you do that is focused on the goal, whatever goal you may have as it relates to training.
Hmm.
Um, you have to make sure that the big investment are being made in things that have big returns. And I think that's where AI can come in, because a computer's ability to assess more information and have an unbiased, and that also has a caveat because there's a garbage in, garbage out problem here,
Yeah.
but to objectively assess that information, the
Hmm.
information and the data may not be unbiased, but the machine has no biases when it's observing them and assessing them, or regressing them in a lot of ways. Can that help us, right? Because these are complex situations, right? There are, I mean, you know systems better than I do, right? There are simple systems, one light switch, one light bulb, only one possible solution for this. There are complicated ones where there are many different inputs or independent variables that feed one dependent variable, and figuring out where that is, which one it is, can be complicated.
Hmm.
But there's also a difference between complicated and complex, right?
Hmm.
Where many inputs, many outputs. That is
Yep.
training. That is human
Yep.
physiology. That is life,
Yep.
right? And the human, and I even mean the human with with Excel at their fingertips, all that stuff, has a very limited ability to find a high coefficient or high signal, whatever you want to call it, reason for that. And people are so desperate that they jump to the thing. I didn't brush my teeth last night, and my HRV went up. That must be the reason, right? And they're looking for causation when there's probably not more than some relative amount of correlation.
Yeah. Or
And so,
I was gonna
yeah, go
say,
ahead.
or they learn about this new thing, and then that is the solution to everything, right? Everything you have a hammer, and
Right.
everything becomes a nail.
Right, and we've talked about this many times, right? The man with the hammer fallacy,
Yeah.
like, and I think there are all these idioms and phrases that we can, a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing,
Yep.
you
Dunning
know,
Kruger
and
effect,
that's,
right?
yes, exactly, and that is what happened. The other thing is that one of my favorite phrases about technology as it relates to training, but really everything is, in the land of blind men, the one-eyed man is king. You
Right.
have a lot of people who don't know anything, and then you have a wearable company come along and say, "Hey, we're able to track this, and this." And because the base level knowledge is so low of the addressable market, they go, "These guys have it all figured out."
Hmm.
And the truth is that, going back to a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing. They're probably not using that information correctly, and in a lot of ways, they're probably better off not using it at all, because
Hmm.
they are the implicit assumption there is that the downside is zero and the upside is massively positive. But the
Hmm.
downside can actually be negative in a lot of these ways. And if you are anchoring your training or your life to something that you think has a causal relationship and it does not, there's a potential for a detrimental effect there. So
Hmm.
all of this stuff has to be taken, with a lot of asterisks or qualifications.
Hmm. Yeah, that's almost with everything, right? It's like the answer is it depends. And
Always,
you
and that's
just asked
frustrating.
me, yeah, yeah, no, it's super frustrating, right? Because we want simple answers to complex solutions, and that's just not in terms of like we have a complex system, right? There's so many inputs that are going into the outputs. How are you feeling on any given day? Are you injured? Are you able to cope with the stress? And then though the one side is fluctuating, that's causing fluctuations and ripples probably in some areas, but then not in others. And you're like, okay, well, and most of the time it's not like a straight across right connection. It's this connects down to actually another input, and then that input feeds back onto this input, which
Correct.
is then an effect, and then this becomes an effector over here. So then it's actually it's not an output anymore, and it's just super
And
complex, right?
maybe, and yeah, so at the most simple, it is a multi-pronged. There's an independent, there's a dependent variable which has multiple, which is multiple independent variables, but each one of those independent variables has its own, is a dependent outcome for other ones, right?
Yep. Yep.
And it can go on forever. That, and the scary part, or not scary part, but the part that drives this point home is that's the easiest possible solution.
Right.
The more likely solution is that it's more like a neural network, and there is no very simple, tree decision, decision tree that just goes on and on and on ad infinitum, right? Like that it's actually, we're not even sure which way is up, and so when you become anchored on one thing, your kids are sick, your wife lost her job, or your husband is traveling a lot for work, or your brother is sick, whatever it may be. The answer is not throw more creatine at it, right? And keep training the way you want because you found out, or that your zone 2 heart rate is 134 and you did this great lab met cart test, and that's a great sort of segue into one of the problems, and maybe that's where we start with, like, the problems with AI. And I'm constantly reminded by a friend of mine who's a brilliant math guy and great endurance athlete. We haven't yet found who the quote is actually attributable to, but it's often attributed to Stephen Hawking, and he said, the greatest enemy of knowledge is not ignorance. It is the illusion of knowledge, right? And so people who don't know are not what's stopping this from progressing. It's people who think they know and don't, right? And then there's the commercial aspect of that. They think they know and they want to sell you something, and they become dogmatic about it, and they become, totally anchored to it, and they convince you. And yes, in the short term, maybe you have some benefits, or you see some benefits, and then you become dogmatic and evangelical about it, and it promotes this almost multi-level marketing type thing, where it's not the reality, and it's not the truth. And so, at its highest level, the biggest problem with AI is, in my mind, as it relates to training, is the idea that it is like a panacea, right? That we've conquered, that we know everything. And the reason that it's not is because data models are only as important, successful, accurate as the data set that they are trained on. And again, if I have heart rate during training and deep sleep numbers and all my nutrition and my lactate threshold and all of this stuff in there, it's very dangerous to jump from there to the assumption that if I just throw all of this in a machine learning model, it can find what has the highest coefficient within those variables, within those inputs. But who says that those inputs are the right set of inputs?
Yeah, right? Those are especially with training, right? We think we have an idea of what the proper inputs are. But I made this comparison the other day. Have you heard of omics techniques, like within biology, right? So you can go get your blood drawn, you can get a muscle sample, you can do all this stuff, and then you can analyze it for DNA, RNA, proteins, metabolites, all of this sort of stuff. And up until now, what we would follow is more reductionist science. Is we would identify one protein and try to figure out what it does by knocking it out, overexpressing it, doing other things like that. But now what we're finding is that when we try to quantify how many proteins are in a sample, there's thousands upon thousands of proteins, all of which interact with each other, all of which, this neural network sort of effect. And so even back then, right, when we were identifying like the one single protein, it's kind of the same approach, right? Is like this one single protein, when we overexpress it, does this, therefore this protein must be important for this.
Right.
That, I think those conclusions are okay to make, So I'm not saying throw reductionist science out, but now what we're finding is like, well, it's not that protein necessarily that is resulting in this result. It's this protein is interacting with this protein is interacting with these three proteins. Then it's coming to one change, right? So if you don't know what those other proteins are, then you would say that the path from point A to point B is just through A and B, as opposed to A to B to C to D, so on and so forth, up that kind of like, decision tree to
Exactly.
X.
That's exactly right. I think a very quick off the top of my head sort of example in real life, which may not be perfectly accurate, is if you eat 3 different meals and you feel sick after them, and I tell you that there are 4 ingredients that definitely overlap in each of those meals, but I don't tell you that it's the only 4, right? And you go, oh, well, then it has to be one of these 4 things. But if you don't know the total ingredient list of each thing, how could you possibly know, right? The answer for the problem with AI for training is the old SAT thing, not enough information, right? Like we don't have, until we're tracking like all of this qualitative stuff or all of this life stuff, like, oh, I changed my pillow. And the heat in my house was broken, so it was a little colder last night than it was the night before. Like, until you have a total data set, and yes, we would throw away the vast majority of that stuff, and those may not be deciding factors. But the not fear, but the conclusion that a lot of people are coming to is, if you could include everything, you would figure out that eating enough, sleeping enough, and balancing your training intensity with your rest.
Yep.
If you think about the coefficient, right? So the coefficient is, when it comes to the machine learning, is the level of impact that any independent variable has on the dependent variable, right? So how much of X is attributable to Y, right?
Yep.
There's a lot of belief out there that from some really intelligent people, way smarter than I am, that if you could track every single thing about you, if you had a team of scientists following you around doing everything you did, that if you took the sum of the coefficients of sleep, balance, training load, and nutrition, you're going to be at 85% or whatever.
Yep.
So the question sort of becomes like, what's the point? I do think that it can be very helpful for finding different. I think that testing can be very helpful for finding thresholds and stuff like that. This is a good example, I think, for AI. And AI, or specifically machine learning and things like that, can be very helpful for finding deviations from that, right? Like, okay, my lactate threshold, LT1 is 134 beats per minute, or whatever it may be. How big of an impact does heat have on that? How big of an impact does hydration have on that? How big of an impact does X, Y, or Z specifically have on that? Granted, yes, we are still opening ourselves up to the fact that it may be a lot of other things. But if you have a big enough sample size, we can probably start to draw some conclusions. I mean, I've had conversations with people who work for some sports nutrition companies who supply some of the fastest runners in the world, who will tell you that dehydration doesn't matter, right? And we've heard degradation of performance starts at 2% dehydration. There was a study, not a study. There were samples collected on. I'm probably not supposed to say who it is. So on a world record holder athlete who was 9% dehydrated when he or she broke a world record at a half marathon or longer distance.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
But that goes back to that causation versus correlation. Does that mean that and so that's the extrapolation that people make. So it doesn't matter. My natural inclination is to say, well, what if he or she had been 4% dehydrated?
Yeah.
Would he or she have even run faster?
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
There was success in spite of something, as opposed to the success because of that.
Yep. Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's really interesting because like you said, the machine is, or the AI learning model is only as good as the inputs. And then two, we have to start thinking of well, what sort of inputs are we going to be putting into these models, and are they actually usable information. For example, if you
Mm-hmm.
had a wrist-based heart rate monitors were absolute
Mm-hmm.
garbage in the beginning, right? They weren't able to measure heart rate, like within, probably like 20 or 30 beats, depending on if you're gripping something, if you're jumping, if you're doing any stuff like that. So if you're putting bad data into something and it's trying to predict, say, like your zones for your heart rates and stuff, then
Mm-hmm.
that's going to skew everything. But I will say that I would rather have something that is slightly off in terms of its like
Mm-hmm.
quote unquote accuracy than something that has a larger variance and is more accurate in general.
So I totally agree with you. I think a lot of the wearables today are what I call consistently inaccurate, right?
Yes. Hmm.
Like 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 look at HRV things. Like if you talk to real sleep scientists, they will just look at you straight in the face and say, "Let me promise you there's no way that we can tell down to the millisecond changes in your heart rate based on something that's strapped to your wrist or around your finger. Like
Right.
period, end of story, doesn't happen. We're talking like it just doesn't work." Or what stage of sleep you're in. We're talking about brain activity, right? Like
Yeah.
if you've ever seen like actual sleep studies, they go into these things and they attach all of these nodes to people and they can hear it. It's like woo, woo. You can hear the brain waves going. You can't tell like what's brain activity by putting a ring on my finger or strapping a thing around my wrist. But it almost doesn't matter, right? Because
Hmm.
you're looking for deviations from that, right?
Hmm.
As long as it's consistently inaccurate, you can throw the absolute number out and you're looking at relative changes and a lot of things. So I agree with you that like wrist-based heart rate monitors, are tough and watch like I wear an armband. I've worn the chest strap many different times. I've actually don't see much difference between. A lot of people have done studies that there's not much difference between those two.
Hmm.
I happen to think that the armband's more comfortable.
There you go.
But it goes back to like an investing philosophy around like the margin of safety, right?
Hmm.
The more inaccurate your information is, the greater your margin of error is, and so the
Hmm.
greater margin of safety you need. So like if you know that your wrist, your Garmin or your Coros or whatever is like not accurate, but you do know that your LT1 is 135 beats per minute, like you probably just want to be lower than that, right? Because
Yeah.
it's safe, and
Right.
you don't have it. I mean, like I would argue there's a very like talking about that ROI, like it's a very high ROI to just get a more accurate heart rate tracker, right?
Yeah.
Like that's not a big investment financially or time wise, and you would gain a lot from it. But these models are only able to assess the information that they're given. And so
Hmm.
if there's bad information, there's going to be bad outputs. And maybe that's a good sort of, segue into a larger discussion around AI. There are things that AI is incredibly good at,
Hmm.
right? Like, and it is all based around the ability to store massive amounts of data,
Hmm.
have perfect and extremely fast recall,
Hmm.
and be unbiased, asterisks, unbiased in their assessment of that data. So I'll give you a good example of something that AI is great for. There's a company, or there are multiple companies, but one is leading the way that is a large language model for legal research.
Mm.
I can't think of a better, like, I mean, there are other ones, but this is an incredible use case for AI because
Yep.
its ability to reference all case law,
That's
right,
ever
and
been
find that's
published.
ever been published and find precedent, challenges to precedent, stuff like that makes total sense. And once you get in natural language processing and all of this stuff, it will be able to write memoranda and things like that because the universe of information it has is holistic as it pertains to that specific need,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
We talk about AI being very powerful in medicine, in medical research,
Yep.
right? it is able to, we think that XYZ causes diabetes, right? Okay, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But if we have, electronic medical records for millions of people, we will be able to regress it and find things using machine learning and stuff like that that no human with Excel or SQL or anything it will ever be able to do,
Yeah.
right? So there are very clearly defined things that AI is great at. It is basically the fastest, smartest research assistant you could have ever imagined, right?
Right.
It is, you know what? It's like if Google, instead of showing you where to get the answer, it actually answers the question for you.
Hmm.
Like that's
Hmm.
like the most layman's terms version. Like when my 70-something-year-old mother asks me what artificial intelligence is, I say, if you Google what is what is the cause of cancer, it will give you a ton of results that are articles
That could
that
be the
are the
answer.
cause of cancer.
Yep.
Artificial intelligence will give you an answer based on those articles that
Yep.
Google is pointing you to, right?
Yep.
So that's the difference.
So here's a question for you then.
Yeah.
So there's like a lot of studies, right, back in the day that looked at, correlation between different things. And one of the things that happens is if you get a big enough data set, then you will statistically skew or like maybe you'll be able to get statistically significant answer even though it doesn't make sense at all. So one of the things
Mm-hmm.
is like the stock market change was related to the height of corn in Iowa on January 14th or something
Mm-hmm.
like that. So I fear that that would be one of the challenges with AI is that it, depending on where it's getting its data from,
Mm-hmm.
is it possible that because we're just getting so much data that our answers might not actually be connected? We just find something that is related to each other.
Yeah, I think so. First of all, to use another common, phrase in our world of investing, which is, I think, attributed to Mark Twain, but I've heard Benjamin Disraeli as well. And I actually think that anything that's a really old quote, people just attribute to Mark Twain.
Yeah.
So I don't know how true that is. But, he said, someone said, there are lies, damn lies, and then there are statistics,
Hmm.
and so you can find these correlative, right, but not causative things, right?
Hmm.
And when I was a kid, it never made any sense to me. Like I was a big sports fan as a kid, still am, but like you'd watch baseball game or something like that, and they'd be like, I'm a Yankees fan. Sorry, everyone else out there. But like it would be like the Yankees have a 73% winning percentage on Wednesdays. It's like, what does that have to do with anything? Like
Right. Right.
it's a different team playing a different team with a different roster. Like, what does Wednesday have to do? That's the height of corn in Iowa. Like, okay, there is a randomness to this, right?
Hmm.
I think you're right. If you find a big enough sample size, you can find two things that are correlated,
Hmm.
like that. But if you think about, and I'm entering the danger zone trying to talk about math and statistics with you, but like if you think about like the R squared, right? Like
Hmm.
that is we're trying to strip the correlation from the causation.
True.
And so the idea is actually the presence of a correlative relationship is not bad if you can prove that it's correlative, right? And
Yeah.
it's not logical or nonsensical, and let's throw that out. Or if the data set is big enough, because it's a multivariable, multi-factor regression, if you can show that yes, this price of the stock market is high at this time, but also only when this thing other also occurs, well,
Right.
then you can discredit the height of corn,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Because that's not what it is. So I think you're right that we can get some bad data, and this sort of goes back to the beginning of the conversation where people can't blindly trust anything, right?
Hmm.
Like oh, my AI trainer says that this is it, so like that must be it. Like if it doesn't make sense, there's probably a reason, and it's something that can be. So I think that people are always looking for the answer, right? The
Hmm.
solution, a very easy one usually. AI is probably best in training used as a self-experimentation tool,
Hmm.
right? This is a potential impact for you. Go out and test it. You got to test it. You got to see if it actually works, right?
Right.
Or if it actually is correlated. Um, it can't be the Bible for you. It's not, it doesn't have, papal infallibility,
Yeah.
or anything like that. It has to be taken in context. And I think that the biggest sort of constraint or limit, I almost said limiter, just talking to Phil, the word limiter comes up, but
Yeah.
limitation of AI is its inability to have all of this data, right? Like, how
Yeah.
did it feel, right? Like, and it's hard it took a long time for someone like me, a super quantitative person, and you and I have been talking since I started running, and like, I want the data, and I want to know exactly what my heart rate should be at a certain time, or because that's a proxy for my lactate, and like, and I want to pace myself off that input versus output, like, all of this stuff, tachometer versus speedometer, like, like I want to do all that stuff. But at the end of the day, you got to get out your rear end out there and run 26.2 miles,
Hmm.
and you've got to be able to adjust. And a dear friend of mine who is an Olympic rower, she's an incredible athlete, um, said to me once, the best performance doesn't come from being the most prepared. The best performance comes from being able to react when something inevitably goes wrong.
Hmm.
And there's
Yeah.
no tool of mathematics, artificial intelligence, or anything that will make you be able to do that other than that comes from trusting yourself and getting experience and practicing
Hmm.
and failing a lot of times.
Yeah.
And if you listen to Courtney Dauwalter, who's probably the most incredible, distance runner or maybe the most incredible runner of any distance I've
Hmm.
ever, seen or heard speak, she talks about her filing cabinet. She's not talking about her heart rate. She and I are like polar opposites. She goes out and runs, and they say, "Oh, how do you do your training?" She goes, "I just run until I get tired, and then I go home."
Yeah.
Like there's no heart rate monitor, there's no training load or TSS score or any of this stuff. Like she just
Hmm.
runs, and then she gets tired and she goes, okay, I go home. Like to me, it's like the Forrest Gump of running.
Yeah.
Like I got tired, I turned around and went home, and so
Yep.
but she goes through that mental Rolodex of like, what is helpful to me in this situation. No AI model is going to
Mm-mm.
tell you that, period.
No, and I mean that's what makes sport and challenging yourself so fun, right? If we knew the
Yep.
outcome of every race, every event going for like sport would be so boring.
Boring.
We
Yeah,
wouldn't watch the Super Bowl, right?
that's exactly right. My grandfather, who I loved very dearly and admired a lot, always used to say, "Well, that's why they run the race." He was talking about
Yeah.
horses, not marathons, but like oh well, if you looked at the board and one guy was a 2-1 favorite and one guy was a 20-1 long shot, like if that were the predetermined outcome, then there would be no reason to run the race because like that's
Hmm.
what it was. And this is going off on a tangent, but I find it fascinating. Even to this day, I learned it, when I was a little kid. The Greeks basically solved every math, problem that there was at the time, except for one thing, which was probability, and it's because they believed in fate. So they didn't. They couldn't. They rejected the premise that there was a probability. Everything was predetermined, right?
Right.
That's the beauty of sport is that nothing is predetermined,
Yep.
right? And if you say, and I'm just as guilty of this as anyone, if not more. So many days in training, I've said I was supposed to do a, whatever, mile repeats at threshold pace. If I can hit those paces, that means that I'll be able to run the marathon at this pace, right?
Right.
And conversely, if I can't, it means I won't be able to. And that is just not true. And it took me a long time to accept that. But again, AI models will never be able to tell you that kind of stuff. They can tell you a lot, but they're a tool in a much larger toolbox, and
Hmm.
they are not a panacea. And I think that's
Yeah.
what's important.
Yeah. No, I think what I wrote down here is AI is going to be used as a compass to be able to kind of guide and hone in your decision making. It's not
Yep.
going to be perfect, but based on the data and the inputs that it has, it's going to give you a better recommendation than potentially if you were just to kind of blindly walk through the woods, right? It'll give you a little bit more of a path.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah. So with that, it's like AI is not going to be able to predict everything for us.
Hmm.
There's a lot of companies now within the fitness space that are coming up with, AI training models
Hmm.
for, how you change your training on a day to day basis, other things like that. Where and how do you see, or what are the strengths and the weaknesses of those, and how do you see those actually being used for somebody, within their training plans?
I think that there's tremendous benefit to some of these things. I think that one of the big benefits is that most training plans are based on longitudinal data,
Hmm.
right? Your own performance over time. Um, but a lot of that, there's a tremendous benefit to looking at, you know, cross-sectional data, right?
Hmm.
And or longitudinal data of other people. You know, I don't know what the full matrix is called, but cross-sectional and longitudinal data, right?
Hmm.
Many data sets of people over a period of time. Again, AI. I mean, AI is a very first of all, AI is a very broad term, right? Artificial
Absolutely.
intelligence, anything that is artificially intelligent, you know, fits. What we're talking about here mostly is machine learning.
Hmm.
Um, but so machine learning again will be able to ingest, like if you had access to Strava or Training Peaks or like one of these things that has like a massive data set, they can probably find some really interesting stuff around age, performance, running experience, and start to get these guidelines. And to your point earlier around like, it's better to have something than nothing.
Hmm.
I think we can probably tighten the bounds around those somethings using massive data sets,
Yep.
right? So maybe for um, the training plans that are like, you know, you can buy a non-specific training plan or something like that, maybe those start to get better, right?
Yep.
And maybe it's less guessing for beginners because we know that there's greater injury risk or there's whatever it may be at certain things. Like I think we can find a lot of broad information on as it relates to I, David, am the coach of Phil, and I'm prescribing you a workout every single day, you know, or not prescribing it every day, but you know, I'm giving you a workout for every day, you know, every 2 weeks rolling or whatever it is. Changing that plan based on or allowing AI to make that plan is going to be tough. I think for a
Hmm.
really long time, right? At the end of the day, are we balancing our training with our recovery? Are we moving from you know polarized training to specific training? You know, like those are the big things. These are the big rocks in the jar, right? And
Hmm.
again, these are the high ROI things. And you know, maybe we get these incremental things, but the incremental things are really for that like super elite athlete, right? The
Right.
guys
Right.
that are trying to take 30 seconds or a minute off of a marathon. Not that I'm not trying to take a minute off my marathon,
And
but
then
it's
and then that 30 seconds is the difference between 10th and first in the
right.
world championships, right?
And $10,000 or $100,000. These people make a living
Yeah.
doing this, you
Yeah.
know, or sponsorship, or you know, we obviously just had the World Indoors last weekend, and USA Indoors before that. we saw some unsponsored athletes winning some big medals,
Hmm.
um, and that's remarkable. And that for them, that could be the difference maker. The other thing I think, I used to think that, like, forget about your feelings. The data was what is important, right?
Hmm.
And now I think it's a blend of both. But one of the interesting things is maybe the data can support your doubt, right? Or
Hmm.
push back your doubt where you say, I feel like I can't keep going, right?
Hmm.
I can't, like, I'm done. I'm maxed out, blah, blah, blah. But there's data that your own data that shows that you're not,
Yep.
right? You're below LT2. We know you can keep going. Yes, you're tired. Da, da, da. Maybe that's a support to help you get into a better mind frame and whatever it may
Hmm.
be. But the idea that, like, I'm going to throw in my last 2 years of Training Peaks data and some machine is going to tell me how to train. I don't think we're there, and I don't honestly don't think we're even close to there. And I'm not sure we're ever going to get there.
Yeah, and I think people should take that kind of as it's a cool challenge, from a technological standpoint. But
Hmm.
a lot of people who listen to this podcast are athletes or coaches who are interested in coaching themselves or becoming an expert kind of in physiology sort of stuff, or just interested in general. And I think we should take that as kind of confidence, being like,
Hmm.
oh well, AI is not going to steal your job if you're a good coach and you know how to change somebody's training plan according to how they're responding, or listen to the individual based on how they're responding to different trainings and other things like that, then it's not going to take your job. Like, we still have to have the experts in the field to say, is this connection between the corn and the stock market, is that actually viable here, right? Or
It's
is
a
it just
sanity
kind of
check.
noise? Yeah, yeah,
It's a sanity check. And by the way, coaches do a lot more than just prescribe training plans. If your coach
right.
is just giving you a training plan, like, you have a bad coach,
It's
right? Like,
that's essentially the bare minimum, right? Like, a coach,
right.
you as a coach should be, like, potentially giving a training plan. And this is something I learned on a podcast that I was on recently. It was, as a coach, you should be giving a training plan, but then at the same time, you should start to teach the individual, if they're interested, in the principles behind why you're making those decisions. So then ultimately, that individual doesn't have to rely on you just for a training plan. They're actually coming up with their own, and then, kind of independently thinking based on everything that is
That's
going
right.
on with them, how their training plan should go.
A great coach makes that part of coaching obsolete, right?
Yep.
I could write my own myself training plan. Yeah, you run zone two a lot of days. You have a long run. You do a workout. As you get closer to the marathon, you do more marathon specific work. Earlier on, maybe you do some VO2 max work, and because you're trying to raise, you're trying to raise LT2. Like, I know the science behind it. But that's just like you said, like, that's table stakes. That's the bare minimum. I work with
Hmm.
Jonah Rosner, who you've had on the podcast, who is a genius
Yeah.
and is um, the most supportive person that I could imagine working with. Like, totally available, so responsive, so genuinely and authentically invested in my success, and success defined not only as speed but also enjoyment and happiness.
Yep.
Like, I consider myself extraordinarily lucky to work with Jonah. He is an incredible coach and becoming a great friend. Even he would tell you, like, David, you probably know, okay, let's introduce some speed work here. Let's do this. Okay. Like, now we're 10 weeks out. Let's do a little bit of marathon specific stuff in the long run. Now we're 8 weeks out. Let's add a little more. Like, and that's not the part. The part of coaching is helping people understand, helping draw out what's really going on, being a support system for them, being an accountability system for them,
Hmm.
um, and helping them adapt to the situation, right? Like, that's why coaches have coaches, right?
Yep.
You don't need, you look at Peter Bromka, you look at, these incredible runners who are also coaches. Like Peter Bromka doesn't need someone, writing his training plan for him. He's like a
Right.
2:19 marathoner. I think he missed the OTQ by like a second or something like that. Like he
Oh,
doesn't
geez.
need that.
Yeah.
Um, he has a coach because it's someone who helps him. It's a partner more than a coach,
Yeah.
right? In a lot of ways. So I think that AI can never replace that. I mean, maybe at some point these machines are going to be talking to us and saying, "It's okay, David, you don't suck. It was hot outside."
Yeah.
But we're a long way from that. And it's the coach is someone who helps you adapt and helps you build confidence and helps you with strategy, and or else similar like to coaches, like Kipchoge wouldn't have a coach, Emma Bates wouldn't have a coach.
Yeah.
Like if it was just like, you don't think Emma knows, or Emily Sisson or Kira D'Amato or Connor Mance, you don't think these guys know when they're supposed to run and how far and how fast? Like this is not complicated. The coaching part is helping people believe in themselves and get them to a point where they're able to give their best on a given day. That's what a coach does, and
Yeah.
machines can't do that. Because going back to the AI point, if you like Google like what can AI not do, right? It will tell you it can't reason and it doesn't have emotion, right?
Yep.
Um, there's no sympathy, empathy, like, so by definition, that is a barrier where
Hmm.
it can't supplant the coach.
Yeah, and but I do think, and exactly like kind of where we started is that AI can give a coach tools to make kind of
Totally.
like the more or not the minuscule, but like the basic requirements of being a coach easier for you, right? Like if you're getting you like, so this is one of the premises of a company called TriDot, which is
Hmm.
an AI company
Yep.
that I actually got to meet a lot of them. They're super nice guys, super intelligent, and their thing is that they allow, or they make the training plan. The AI model makes the
Hmm.
training plan, and then the coach can go through and they can tweak it based on what the athlete's interests are and other things like that. But it gives the coach a lot more ability and free time to actually coach and be, that individual's, kind of support crew, as opposed to, just writing training plans and changing the training plans. Because a good coach who is not using AI is looking at your data, tweaking your data based on the data that they're seeing, based on the conversations that they're having with you. And yes, AI is not going to be perfect, but I can guarantee you it's better, again, than you just kind of going out and just being like, I'm going to run the same pace every single day for all my workouts, right?
Hmm.
There's like a hierarchy of like what it, like, like worst to best practices.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
and I
And
think
it can
AI
help you
is getting us.
analyze.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
It is a tool to help you. It is not, like I said, this panacea. It can help you on days, because so it's interesting. I was talking to a sports performance coach once, and she was saying that the number one predictor of performance is athlete mindset, right? Like on the day of a performance,
Yep.
right? Like on the day of the marathon, on the day of the Super Bowl, on like that. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And she was like, yes, but the problem is that the human's ability to accurately assess their own like confidence or readiness is essentially zero, you know?
Yep.
So the point is that it is a tool that can help you. There are many days when I will wake up and go, "Oh my God, I'm so well rested. I slept like a baby." Blah, blah. And I will look at, because I wear, I have wearables and I track all this stuff, and I'll look at the data and I'm like, "Wait, what? I thought I slept great. Like, why is my HRV so low or whatever?"
Hmm.
And it actually has a negative impact on my day. I go,
Yep.
"Oh my God, my training is going to be terrible today," or whatever. I'm going to be exhausted by 1 p.m. or whatever it may be. Or the opposite. I slept terribly. It's like, whoa, I'm gonna 60-day high in my HRV, or my resting heart rate was perfect, or I got enough sleep, whatever. Um, so our ability to assess the way we feel isn't great,
Hmm.
and so this can help us. Oh, I did a really hard workout. Okay, and so I didn't recover well. Well, actually, you did recover well, taking into account these 40 factors, which you cannot possibly regress in your head,
Right.
right? Like that is a tool, but it should be taken as a tool, not
Yep.
the tool.
Yep. I 100% agree with that, and I think that's the challenge that I run into with a lot of people. They're like, oh well, I started using lactate, and lactate is the answer to everything.
Hmm.
It's like, well, do you know that lactate changes based on if you're fasted, if you're fed, if you have a carbohydrate laden meal right beforehand, other
Hmm.
things like that. Lactate's going to change. Oh well, no, I didn't know that. Oh, did you know that lactate changes based on the heat? So it's like, so again, it's lactate is good because it gives you an internal marker of how your body
Hmm.
is responding to exercise intensity. But again, it's just a tool. It's the same thing with like near infrared spectroscopy. Like I work for Moxie
Hmm.
Monitor, but I'm not going to go out and tell everybody that this is going to cure cancer or make you the best athlete, right? It's
Right.
it's just another tool in your
It's a tool.
toolbox, and it's going to help. It's again, all of these tools are trying to hone, like if the path is this way, right? If it's
Hmm.
straight ahead, if you're not using any tools or you're not using any information, then the swing in terms of where that path is headed is really large. Whereas if you
Yep.
start to take in more and more data points, that swing in where that path needs to go becomes tighter and tighter, or at least you get a better idea of which direction may be the most beneficial.
Yeah, I would say think about it. I totally agree with you, and I would say think about it this way: if you're at a point in a city or a town or whatever, and I tell you go to X point, I
Hmm.
don't tell you how to get there. I don't tell you anything. You are going to have an inefficient path to that point,
Hmm.
right? You're going to do trial and error. You're going to probably get lost. You're going to find your way back, so on and so forth. Okay, now I start again. We start again at the same point. I say, go to that point, and I show you a map, but I take it away. You go, okay, I generally know it's, if I hit Third Street, then I can do this, whatever, and you get more efficient at it.
Hmm.
And then I say, hey, you can keep the map, right, or whatever it may be. And then I say, here's a phone with GPS on it, so no matter where you are,
Yep.
it will tell you the most efficient path there. AI is not GPS. It will
Hmm.
not tell you the single factually accurate, most efficient way to get from point A to point B. Because, going back to the beginning, that is a simple problem. Or that's really a complicated problem because there are many different ways to get the same thing. But it is
But
not a complex
it's
problem.
relatively speaking, it is a
Right,
simple problem. You A
right.
point A to point B, right?
Yes, right. And so point A to a simple problem would be you're walking down a hallway and the only way to get from here, or like a rat in a maze, with only one path. There's only one way to get there.
Hmm.
Maybe if you have a map, there are different paths you can get there. So it's a complicated problem, but it's not complex because there's only one endpoint, right? GPS, AI is not going to make a complex problem simple. End of
Yep.
story. And that's what everyone wants it to do. And it's
Yep.
just it's not possible because complex problems cannot be solved with simple answers.
Yep. Yep. No, I think we'll leave it there because this was a great conversation, David. I always appreciate you coming on the show. Yeah, and it's the idea too of, I just want to reiterate to everybody is that AI is going to continue to get better as
Hmm.
our ability to collect data, from both like an individual standpoint, to a research standpoint, in kind of making a conglomeration of all of that data gets easier, and
Hmm.
sifting through data that's bad, right? That's another thing is I think in this day
Correct.
and age, we have a lot of misinformation. And I'm not saying like, news media
Yeah,
misinformation sort
yeah.
of stuff. I'm just saying like,
Inaccurate.
yeah, inaccurate, like conclusions based off of one piece of information, right? And so we also need to get really good at sorting that out. don't throw the AI out with the bathwater. I think it's
That's
still,
right.
you know, got potential. But just be
But
skeptical, just like
it
with
has
everything,
to.
right?
Yeah, it has to be good data going in. Like we said a little bit at the beginning, a little bit of information is a dangerous thing,
Yep.
and just to put a pin in the lactate thing, like, my idol in certain ways, Gustav, who coaches Gustav and
Yeah.
Christian Olaf, who you have met, um, will tell people like not to use lactate because they probably don't. They're probably not going to collect it properly, and even if they do, they probably don't know what it means. Like
Yep.
you'll see these guys on Instagram, like I ran a 5:30. I ran 5 minutes for a 10K, and I was at 1 millimole. Like, do you think that's more likely, or the fact that there was a sampling error is more likely?
Or like another question you have to ask in those sort of situations is like, well, are you fat adapted athlete who didn't eat any
Right, exactly,
carbohydrates or anything like that? And that's,
exactly.
you know, so it's like
It's
again,
always the next question,
yep,
right?
yep.
That's the most like someone once said to me, and I honestly don't remember who it was. That the most important question you'll ever ask is always the next one.
Yep.
And I think that's the point. Don't throw the AI out with the bathwater, but always be asking that next question. Always be questioning what results come out of anything.
Hmm.
Does this make sense? Is it rational? How can I use it? How does it gel or butt heads with other things that I know to be true, or other things, or things that other techniques or practices are telling me? Like, just
Hmm.
take a step back, be patient. Don't think that there's this magical answer for everything, because there isn't.
Yep.
And have a rational expectation, and there's probably some good use for it.
Yep. It's another tool in your toolbox.
Yep.
Um, cool. Well, David, thanks again for coming on. Where can people find you if they have more questions about AI or software or other thing, or data driven, performance, I guess.
Yeah, I love talking to people in the running community. I'm still a relative newbie here. I've run a few marathons, but I am not by any means the fastest guy in the pack or the most experienced one. But if anyone wants to reach out, you can reach me on Instagram. Is probably where I spend most of my time. It's at dmehlo. It's DMEHLO. And yeah, would love to talk to anyone who has questions, or just as importantly, people who want to help me learn more. Would
Yep.
love to meet you guys, and collectively try to become people who are, like I said, reaching their full potential.
Yeah, that's awesome. If you have any questions about this topic or any other topics, you can always find me on Instagram at critical02. You can comment down below if you're on YouTube, and you can also leave feedback if you're on Spotify. I don't believe you can do it on Apple, but if you're on Spotify, you can leave feedback for us about the podcast, how we can change things. Unfortunately, I can't respond directly to you, but just know I am reading them, and I am trying to morph the podcast into, morph the podcast based on good criticism or good direction. So with that, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and we'll catch you in the next one.